In 1982, it was said that John Belushi died of cocaine poisoning, but his brother Jim knows something that no one else does. Now that he is 70 years old, he is revealing the shocking truth about John's football injuries, the brain disease that no one diagnosed, and the Hollywood cover-up that still haunts him. This is what really happened to SNL's biggest star. John Belushi was born on January 24, 1949, in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were hardworking Albanian immigrants who built a life in America from the ground up. Adam came to the United States as a child. As a teenager in 1934, he worked long hours in restaurants before opening his own. His mother, Agnes, was born in Ohio to Albanian parents and worked as a pharmacy assistant before raising the family. They taught their children the importance of discipline and hard work, which they passed on to their children. John grew up with 3 siblings, Moran, Jim, and Billy. Their home was strict, but full of love, and laughter was always present, even when things were hard. John had a natural talent for comedy. He loved making people laugh, and even though his parents didn't fully understand his talent, they supported him. But Josh wasn't just a funny kid, he was also competitive and wanted to stand out. When his family moved to Wheaton, Illinois, John found new ways to shine at Wheaton Central High School. He became co-captain of the football team, and his rough style earned him the nickname Killer Belushi. But his real passion was performance. He joined the school's theater program and quickly became a star. His drama teacher, Dan Payne, saw this and encouraged him. He helped John get a summer job in a professional theater in 1967. That experience changed John's mind. He realized that performing wasn't just a hobby, it was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. Music was another creative outlet for him. In high school, he formed a band with friends called the Ravens and played drums and sang with the same wild energy he brought to football and theater. In 1965, the band recorded a single called Listen to Me Now, Jolly, Green Giant. It wasn't a hit, but it gave John his first taste of the spotlight. He felt comfortable performing in front of an audience anywhere after high school. John could have played football at Western Illinois University, but he chose a different path. He spent a year at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater and then transferred to the College of DuPage, where he co-founded a comedy group called the West Compass Players and played in small venues like coffee shops and churches. John was working on his style and learning how to command a room with just his presence. In February 1971, when he was only 22, he took a big step forward when he tried out for the Second City, Chicago's famous improv theater. He had no formal training, but his raw energy was impossible to ignore. He was loud, unpredictable, and fearless. The directors saw his potential and gave him a spot in the troupe, making him one of the youngest performers at the Second City. Even though he only made $150 a week, John Belushi was surrounded by some of the funniest people in the country. His time at the Second City wasn't just an early job. It was where he honed his style and met the people who would have a lasting impact on his career. Harold Ramis and Brian Doyle Murray were 2 of these people. Ramis was a great writer who would go on to make legendary movies like Ghostbusters and Caddyshack, but in those early days, they became close while working on sketches and sharing ideas. Ramis pushed Belushi to play different characters, which helped him improve his timing and delivery. Then there was Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's older brother. He had a drive and a clever sense of humor that balanced out Belushi's loud and unpredictable energy. The 3 of them, Belushi, Ramis, and Doyle Murray, became an unstoppable team. They were young, hungry, and determined to take comedy in a new direction. But the Second City was just the start. In 1972, Belushi got a part in the National Lampoon Lemmings, an off-Broadway show that says the Woodstock Music Festival. The show opened at the Village Gate in New York and quickly became a hit. It was loud, fast, and completely ridiculous. The cast was full of future stars like Christopher Guest and Chevy Chase, and Belushi fit right in. One of his best roles was as King Herod in a parody of Jesus Christ Superstar. The sketch was called Jackie. The audience went crazy for Christ Superstar, which mixed music and comedy in a way that made them laugh out loud. The cast fed off of the audience, and night after night, Belushi proved he was something special. Lemmings ran for 350 performances and got great reviews. Time magazine called it a ultra-funny spoof of the rock scene and its counterculture folk heroes. It wasn't just another comedy show, it was a launchpad. Belushi left Lemmings with more than just experience. He had momentum with people in the industry. People started to pay attention. One of them was Lorne Michaels, a producer looking for comedians for a new late-night show. But before Saturday Night Live, Belushi took another step in his career. From 1973 to 1974, he was on the National Lampoon Radio Hour, a comedy radio show. Radio was different from TV because there was no audience to feed off of and no stage to move around on. Everything had to come through in his voice, which forced him to improve his delivery and focus on the rhythm of his jokes. Future stars Gilda Radner, Bill Murray, and Chevy Chase were all in the cast. Together they made fast-paced, irreverent comedy that set the tone for what SNL would become. John Belushi's path to Saturday Night Live wasn't easy. In 1975, Chevy Chase and Michael O'Donoghue pushed for him to join the show, but Lorne Michaels wasn't sure at first. He thought Belushi's style, which was wild, unpredictable, and deeply physical, might not fit the vision he had for SNL. But when he had his audition, Belushi nailed it. Walking in and doing what he did best, leaving Michaels with no choice but to be on the show. Belushi joined the first cast, which also included Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, and Jane Curtin. Bill Murray was supposed to be there too, but the budget was tight, so he had to wait. The first episode aired on October 11th, 1975, and it was a sketch called The Wolverines. Belushi came in second, but there had been a fight to get there. But Belushi didn't want to sign the 5-year deal because it only paid $750 per show. He almost quit before the show even started, but Bernie Brillstein, who would later become his manager, talked him out of it, and he finally agreed. He signed the contract just before airtime. The first season of SNL was a mess. The set wasn't finished hours before the premiere, and no one knew if the show would make it. But Belushi thrived in the chaos. His energy was electric, his presence impossible to ignore, and he brought a level of physical. Few comedians could match his raw talent and chemistry with Dan Aykroyd, which helped shape the future of Saturday Night Live. Their partnership would lead to some of the show's most famous moments, including the birth of the Blues Brothers, but that was just the beginning. Belushi's impact on SNL wasn't just his energy, it was also the characters he created that became instant classics. For example, Samurai Futaba was one of the most famous examples of a sword-wielding samurai thrown into modern jobs. Always honorable, always serious, and somehow, Belushi got the idea for his sketches from Toshiro Mun's roles in Akira Kurosawa movies. He didn't speak real Japanese, but his performance was so sincere that it worked. The sketches became a staple, especially when Buck Henry hosted Samurai Delicatessen, Samurai Tailor, and Samurai Optometrist. Each one took the same premise and made it better. Then there was the Olympia Cafe's cheeseburger sketch, which was just a Greek diner where the only things on the menu were cheeseburgers, Pepsi, and chips. Customers wanted something different, but Belushi, as the owner, wouldn't change anything. The fast-paced delivery, over-the-top accent, and chaotic energy made it one of SNL's most famous sketches, and people still quote it today. But Belushi wasn't just about loud characters and over-the-top physicality, he was also very good at impressions. When he played Joe Cocker on SNL, it was hard to tell who he was until the real Joe Cocker came out and joined in. He was famous for his performance as Henry Kissinger. He turned the former Secretary of State into a bumbling, heavily accented caricature. He also played Beethoven, Captain Kirk, and Marlon Brando. Each time he committed fully, making each impression feel like a whole new character. What made Belushi stand out was his intensity. Whether he was doing a pratfall or a sharp political satire, he gave it his all. That energy was contagious, and it helped define SNL in its early years. Shows like Belushi proved that SNL wasn't just about writing jokes, it was also about performance, presence, and being fearless. But behind the scenes, the pressure was building. SNL was live, unpredictable, and tiring. Belushi was becoming a star, but with that came more sketches, performances, and appearances. To keep up, he turned to cocaine. At first, it was just a way to get through the late nights, but soon it turned into something more. As his drug use got worse, people noticed. Even though he was having more and more problems, his work never stopped. Every week he delivered, and the audience never saw the stress, exhaustion, or personal battles. They only saw the performances that made SNL history. But behind closed doors, Belushi was fighting a battle he couldn't win. John Belushi's rise in Hollywood was lightning fast and unforgettable. His big break came in National Lampoon's Animal House, a 1978 comedy that changed the game. Animal House shocked everyone by making over $141 million, making it the third highest grossing movie of the year, behind Grease and Superman. No one thought an R-rated comedy would make that much money, but it did. Animal House wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural event. John Belushi played Bluto Blutarsky, the ultimate party-loving troublemaker. He didn't just act in the role, he owned it. In one scene, he smashed a guitar to pieces. Without a doubt, he was in charge of another crazy toga party that Belushi had a way of making chaos look easy. The movie was so popular that college students all over the country started throwing toga parties to try to capture the wild spirit of the movie. Some of his funniest lines weren't even in the script. For example, he ran across wet grass, slipped, and fell to the ground, but instead of stopping, he turned it into a perfect comedy moment. Bluto became an instant icon, and Belushi became a superstar, even though he was only paid $40,000. Hollywood had finally seen what he could do, and bigger things were on the way. His next movie, The Blues Brothers, was based on a simple Saturday Night Live sketch and turned it into a huge hit. He and Dan Aykroyd played Jake and Elwood Blues, two brothers who were trying to save their childhood orphanage by getting their old blues band back together. It was a mix of comedy, music, and action. The Blues Brothers was a disaster from beginning to end. The original script by Aykroyd was over 300 pages long and almost impossible to read. Before filming could even begin, director John Landis had to cut it down. But the biggest problem was that Belushi's drug use was getting worse. He would disappear for hours or even days at a time, and the crew had no idea where he was. At one point, they set up a radio system just to find him, but when he was on set, he threw everything into the role, even though there were problems. The movie was a hit, making over $15 million worldwide. It wasn't just a comedy, it was a love letter to blues music and one of the most unique movies of its time. But Belushi wasn't done yet. In 1979, he starred in 1941, a big-budget World War II comedy directed by Steven Spielberg. It had an all-star cast, a huge production, and high expectations, but it didn't work. While it made money, it wasn't as popular as Animal House or The Blues Brothers. In 1981, he tried something completely different. He starred in Continental Divide, a romantic comedy about a tough Chicago journalist who falls in love with a quiet scientist living in the mountains. It was a softer, more serious role, and critics praised his performance, but audiences didn't connect with it as much because they still saw him as the crazy, unpredictable comedian and not the romantic lead. During the filming of Animal House, he was already using cocaine heavily. Some of his funniest scenes were filmed while he was high. On The Blues Brothers, his drug use got worse, causing delays and sending production costs through the roof. People around him were worried, but Belushi kept going. John Belushi married his high school sweetheart Judith Jackman on New Year's Eve 1976. She was more than his wife, she was his partner, his biggest fan, and a key part of his career. She helped shape the Blues Brothers and stood by him as he went through rough times. As his fame grew, so did his drug use. Cocaine became a daily part of his life, and their marriage began to fall apart under the stress. Judith did everything she could to help him. She saw the man behind the crazy performances, the one who made people laugh but was also dealing with his own problems. She was there for him through the highs and lows, but addiction doesn't wait for love. It took over and pulled him further away from the life they had built together. His mood swings and long disappearances made her feel helpless. After he died, she made it her mission to protect his legacy. She wanted people to remember Belushi's talent, not just his problems. In 1990, she wrote Samurai Widow, a book that showed a side of him that most people never got to see. She worked on projects that honored him and kept his memory alive. Over the years, she built her own life. She remarried and changed her name to Judith Jacqueline Belushi Pano, but she never stopped caring about the man she had loved. In July 2024, after a battle with cancer, she passed away. She left behind a legacy that made sure the world never forgot who John Belushi really was. For all the energy and confidence he showed on screen, Belushi struggled with deep insecurities that got worse with success. Saturday Night Live made him a star, Animal House made him a box office hit, and the Blues Brothers showed he could do even more. But with each new success came more pressure to be the funniest, biggest, and best. It was competitive in comedy, and he felt it every day. Chevy Chase had already left SNL for Hollywood, and Belushi hated feeling like he was falling behind. He worked harder, pushed himself further, and turned to cocaine to keep going. It wasn't just for partying, it was to stay sharp, stay ahead, and fight the fear that his time at the top wouldn't last. Cocaine was easy to get and was used by regular people in Hollywood. It was impossible for someone like Belushi, who was already having a hard time, to get away from it. He tried to stop, and there were times when he fought to regain control. When he was filming Continental Divide in 1981, he made one of his best attempts at staying sober. The movie was different. It was a romantic comedy, and it gave him a chance to show that he could do more than loud physical humor. He had a bodyguard named Smokey Wendell who kept drugs away from him, and for a while he stayed clean and focused on his work. He proved to himself that he didn't need cocaine to perform. Next was Neighbors, his next movie with Dan Aykroyd. It was a disaster from the start. He hated how it was being made, and his anger led him back to old habits. He started using again, and his mood swings came back. He wouldn't leave his trailer until director John Ailson left the set, and one night he threw trash at the office of Columbia's musical director. He no longer had control over his life during Continental Divide. John Belushi arrived in Los Angeles on February 28, 1982, he was supposed to work on a movie script and meet with Hollywood executives, but things quickly went off track. Instead of focusing on work, he got caught up in a cycle of partying and drug use. He checked into Bungalow Number 3 at the Chateau Marmont, a hotel known for its privacy and famous guests. It became his refuge, a place where he could escape the outside world. Every night, he went from club to club on the Sunset Strip, stopping at the Roxy, the Rainbow Bar, and Dan Tana's. He wasn't just drinking and partying, he was looking for a way to escape. Cocaine was easy to find, and he took full advantage of it. One of his favorite places was on the Rocks, an exclusive lounge above the Roxy where celebrities could party in private. It was perfect for someone like Belushi who wanted to be around people but hide his problems. He looked worse by the day, his face was puffy and his energy was gone. His wife Judy was worried about him in New York, but he wasn't listening. Even his friends were worried. On March 4th, Robert Darrow and Harry Dean Stanton went to Belushi's bungalow and saw that it was a mess, with clothes on the floor, food lying around, and an overall feeling of chaos. They invited him to dinner at Dan Tana's in an effort to get him out of whatever dark place he was in, but he refused. Instead, he stayed with Kathy Smith, a woman with a history of drug use, and that night she gave him heroin and cocaine. The next morning, his trainer and bodyguard Bill Wallace went to the bungalow to drop off a typewriter and a tape recorder and found Belushi lying in bed. He tried to wake him up, but couldn't. He tried CPR, but it was too late. John Belushi was 33 years old and had died. The autopsy confirmed what many people had thought, that his body was overloaded with heroin and cocaine, his brain was swollen, and his lungs were full of fluid. His body was breaking down after years of heavy drug use. His death wasn't just an accident. It was the last step in a long, downward spiral. The Chateau Marmont, which had been a quiet retreat for celebrities, became the center of a media storm. There were a lot of reporters and camera crews outside the hotel that night, but now it would always be associated with Belushi's overdose. Kathy Smith, the woman who had been with him that night, quickly became the focus of the investigation. She had been giving him drugs for days, and witnesses said they had seen her inject him more than once. After Belushi's death, she ran away to Canada, but she couldn't get away from what had happened. Eventually, she admitted that she was the one who had given him the drugs. The fatal dose. She was charged with second-degree murder and drug crimes. The case was all over the news. In the end, she took a plea deal to avoid the most serious charges. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but she only served 15 months before being released. The judge made it clear that Belushi made his own decisions, but Smith's actions directly caused his death. Jim Belushi thinks that his brother John may have had chronic traumatic iniopools to the head, which can cause... For many years, people thought that concussions were the most dangerous injury, but new research shows that the number of times a person's head is hit, no matter how big or small, is just as important. Studies on former football players have shown how bad this problem is. In a study of 631 brains donated by players, nearly half showed advanced CTE and another 26% had early signs. Many of these players had never been diagnosed with a concussion, showing that even small hits repeated many times can be harmful. This idea brings up an unsettling possibility. If John Belushi had CTE, he never knew it. He crashed through tables, did crazy stunts, and gave everything to his performances. The disease wasn't well understood back then, and there's no way to know for sure without an autopsy of his brain. But if Jim is right, it could mean John was dealing with more than just addiction and the pressures of fame. Jim also thinks John's drug use was a way for him to deal with his worry and pain after becoming famous on Saturday Night Live. He felt like he had to be funny all the time and keep up a certain image. The lifestyle was draining. Cocaine was common in Hollywood, and John turned to it as a way to get through it. He wasn't the only actor or musician of that time who used drugs to get through it, but for John, it became something he couldn't control. Jim has been open about how Hollywood made things worse in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The industry ignored the problem and in some cases even encouraged it. Some producers, directors, actors, and managers turned a blind eye, and some even made drugs available to keep actors working. It was almost impossible for actors to quit in that setting. John Belushi's story is heartbreaking. He was a comedy genius who died at only 33 years old. Today, Hollywood is different. There is more awareness about addiction and mental health, and there is more help for those who are struggling. But back then, people like JN. Even with everything that happened, John's legacy lives on. On May 4, 2004, he was posthumously given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His effect on Saturday Night Live and comedy in general can still be seen today. He may have died too soon, but his influence never went away.